Hello and welcome to Social Housing Know-How podcast series number 4. Today we are focusing on the topic of grant, audit and assurance. As we all know, grant funding is vital, but the rules and requirements can be complex and at times overwhelming. Chirag joins me today as our Grant Audit and Assurance Director.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thank you. And I think today you're going to talk about some practical insights into how the organisations in the housing sector can approach the risk around grant and assurance and compliance around grant funding and the claims they make.
Yes, exactly. And some practical tips for that they can work on to kind of make sure that they are compliant.
So Chirag, you worked with many clients delivering retrofit and major decarbonisation programmes. Programmes themselves are going well, but it doesn't seem that the grant claims are. So what would you do in that instance? How could you help?
So I think the main areas where clients get this wrong is that they have a bit of a misunderstanding about what is eligible and what's a non-eligible cost, especially when rules change between when they do their application and when they actually submit their grant claims. I think what's really key for clients and any recipients of grants is that they make sure that they read their grant funding agreements in detail and understand each and every requirement. So some areas where things have gone wrong is, for example, where they have claimed VAT on their grant. However, they are a VAT registered organisation.
Okay.
So they can already reclaim their VAT in their VAT return. So essentially they're double dipping
Gosh,
the
right,
funding.
okay. Yeah.
Which then can come with clawbacks from the donors.
And I guess you help organisations to spot this difference. Yeah. And I get what then happens next when they understand what is, I guess, eligible and ineligible within the grant claims.
Depending on the situation, so sometimes we have to report whatever it is that we find, but we can also work with organisations to find solutions to the problems that they've encountered. So one example is an organisation that was able to claim pre-award staff costs. However, they claimed them, one, using estimated PAYE figures, but also based on an extended period of time beyond what they were able to claim, because the date that they actually signed the grant funding agreement was later than what was initially estimated to be. So when it came to doing the audit, we worked with them to talk them through how they should be calculating it, what the eligible periods actually are, and then we couldn't recalculate it for them because it is an audit, but they recalculated it based on what we explained to them was eligible and why we would have to consider what they'd done to be ineligible. And then based off of that, they were able to support about 75% of the costs.
Oh, excellent. So I guess the devil is in the detail.
Exactly.
And in the contractual arrangements as much as the evidence as well, the detail around the evidence that supports it.
Yeah, and I think what's really key is that if they're making anything that's judgmental, so things like milestone-based payments or progress payments. So for example, when organizations are paying suppliers for retrofit assessments or for building works based on progress of deliverables, that they document at the time on what basis they're making those judgments. So I think what's really key is that it has to be done at that time specifically, not retrospectively.
Okay, and that therefore they won't lose any of that funding that they are expecting to get.
Exactly. I think what they really have to demonstrate is that it's a reasonable judgment that they've made and that a reasonable person would reach that same conclusion. And it's much easier from an audit perspective to see the logic if they're documenting it and at least assessing it in the time.
And is that something that you could help them with if they're seeking to judge something? Could they come to you for a bit of advice?
Yes, 100%. So we can sit down with them, we can go through their grant funding agreement and sort of what the options are for whatever's in dispute or what they're unsure about.
Yeah, and draw on your expertise, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's not even that organizations don't know the answer. Sometimes they're just looking for a second opinion just to make sure that their logic or their judgments are reasonable.
Yeah, and will be accepted, I guess, by
Yeah,
that funding
exactly.
body overall. Excellent. So, Shirag, some of the really large developments are funded by several bodies. And I guess from that perspective, what risk does that create, or risks does it create?
I guess the biggest risk really is non-compliance, because with having multiple funders and donors, you have 3, 4, 5 different grant funding agreements. Sometimes one of them might even be a loan covenant from a bank as well. So all of them will have slightly different compliance requirements, slightly different reporting requirements as well, which also, depending on the development, may be slightly different to the grant funding agreements that that organization has had previously. So the biggest risk is non-compliance or overlapping compliance requirements. So what's really key there is for finance teams and compliance and legal teams to really sit down and read and make sure that they truly understand all of the different requirements. The other area where this can cause a lot of challenge is because of the overlapping reporting requirements. Sometimes they have to have 3, 4, 5 different audits for a development. So where we have helped a client previously is sat down with them, analyzed their different grant funding agreements, and developed a single grant assurance framework to cover all of their donors and that loan covenant tied to that development. We then took that assurance framework and presented it to each of the individual donors to work with them to minimize the workload of the finance team, but also the cost that the organization has to incur as well. Because if it's 4 separate audits, then that's 4 separate audit fees. Whereas if it's one audit, it's only one audit fee.
Yeah.
So when we presented it to the different funders, they actually thought it was a great idea. They did have some feedback on some of the points where they wanted us to delve a little bit deeper into certain areas, or actually in one of those areas they decided they didn't want us to look at all because it wasn't really of interest to them.
Yeah.
So then we took that out completely. But in the end, what we produced was a fairly detailed 20-page report on the entire development site, which was then able to cover off all of their funders and developments in that location. But then it also meant in the subsequent years, because we'd put in all of that effort and time up front, that it was just a rinse and repeat of those same procedures over and over again.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So it's actually worth, in those circumstances where there are multiple funders, actually talking to someone like yourself about how to put that together to present as one and to have it audited once. And I guess the other element for me is, well, I guess what does that mean for the organization on a day-to-day basis? How did they summarize things to be able to present it to you for audit?
What was key to them was recording all of the costs within that development site and having a clear trail to the different funders, because some funders wanted to fund housing for specific demographics of people, or with certain abilities. So they needed to be able to trace all of that through. So having a really strong fund accounting system, which their finance team was able to understand and was able to trace through from the purchasing systems as well.
Yeah. So the evidence was there as well.
evidence.
Yes.
But also the other point was that they engaged with us as early as possible so that we could discuss these things with them and also point out to them what might be potential pitfalls, which areas they need to look at. And then they were able to present to us saying, this is how we are going to be doing this. This is how we'll be documenting this. Would this be acceptable for you from an audit perspective, or would this be insufficient?
Yeah.
And we were able to provide that feedback to them ahead of time so that when it comes to the audit, everything's already set up and ready to go.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's about, I guess, in many ways, being proactive, rather than actually, yes, putting it through the system as normal and then coming and asking us to take a look at that so that we get everything covered.
Yeah, exactly. And also that time invested up front in planning and preparation means a much smoother time for the audit, especially when most organizations reporting years end 31st March, as do the grant reporting cycles. So we want to try and minimize the impact on the finance teams who are already stretched as it is.
So Chirag, sometimes the challenge isn't actually the claim or its requirements, but actually that within organisations, then the knowledge about grant claims or a specific grant claim is held by one or two individuals within an organisation. So how do you help clients overcome that?
So there's a few things that I've done. But what's really key is making sure that processes and procedures are actually written down and documented, not just in someone's head. I think the things happen, people move on, and it's really essential that that institutional knowledge is written down somewhere. And also, it's explained why things are done a certain way. I think for some clients that we've been into, they say that this is how it's always been done. But an area that I have helped clients with is delivering training to their teams in analysing grant funding agreements, in analysing their policies and procedures against the grant funding agreements to make sure that they're compliant. So for one client, they listed out to me all of their different donors. And then based off of that, we developed a training program, I think it was about 3 hours long, where we went through some of the key areas that they need to be aware of, some areas of overlap, but also some areas where the different donors are separate from each other and where the processes need to be slightly different. So that was an interactive session, which also gave the finance teams an opportunity to ask questions as well around some of the areas that they found challenging. Another area that's really essential is that it's not just finance teams or compliance teams that are aware of these conditions, but also people in procurement and purchasing and the people delivering the actual programs of developments or whatever the program is, because they're the ones that are going to be the first line of defense to make sure that the organization is doing it correctly. And what's essential is that when we deliver the training to clients, is that it's done in really clear, non-legal, non-finance language where anybody can understand it.
Yeah, and I think that engagement from us to the client or to the organisation and the people who are engaged in collecting the evidence, recording the evidence, submitting the claims, I think that is really valuable in terms of, I'm sure you can see it sat in the room.
Yeah, especially not just within the same organisation, but where organisations are working as part of a consortium, either with sub-recipients, subcontractors, consortium arrangements, whatever their legal setup is. But even that training being delivered downstream to the organizations that they give the grants to or pass funding on to, that's essential as well, because part of a lot of these funding schemes requirements is to develop the capacity of these smaller organizations where they don't need to go through consortiums in the future.
Yeah. So what does good look like, and that effective process that comes from it as well?
Exactly that.
So what do organisations most value about your support? And I guess in terms of some kind of close and reflection on our session, what do you actually wish they knew more about the grant audit and assurance world, where you're an expert?
I think what clients value most is our brighter thinking approach, where we are solution focused. So we're not just coming up with this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. It's that we're with them through their entire journey of the grant process, from when they first receive their grant all the way through to the audit itself, where we can provide them with practical steps for improvement, not just best case, ideal world scenario situations. And that's where they really value, because we really understand what our clients do, how they operate, and what's feasible for them.
And what do you wish they would know more about audit and assurance? Anything?
What I wish they knew more about audit and assurance is that we're not there to catch them out. We will provide the support that they need within the ethical bounds, of course, but we're always there as a trusted advisor to them.
I think that's a really good way of summarising it, Chirag. Thank you so much, Chirag, for your expertise and those insights. Thank you for listening and joining us for more Brighter Thinking from Menzies LLP. Join us for future episodes by signing up on our website.